Chapter 60, I am Kevin Voss, 2. As night shrouded Hallberg, a silhouette sped into the busy streets of the city. Swiftly moving between cars, the figure of an individual could be seen riding on top of a slick motorbike that emitted no sound. If not for the two lights coming from the front of the bike, someone could have easily overlooked the bike that was swiftly moving in between the streets. After 10 more minutes of riding, silently stopping in front of a large villa, Kevin took off his helmet, revealing his two scarlet red eyes that shone under the moonlight. Schwa. System open inventory. Extending his hand to the right and retrieving it back, a drone appeared in his hand. Turning on the drone, Kevin turned on the cloaking function as well as the noise dampening function installed on the drone. Bzzz. Throwing the drone in the air, it silently disappeared and melted into the darkness of the night, completely blending with everything around it. Staring at where the drone used to be, Kevin blankly looked at the villa before him. This wasn't the first time Kevin assassinated someone. Multiple times the system had given him similar missions where he would have to kill highly ranked individuals. Therefore, as soon as he got assigned his mission, he already had all the necessary things needed to carry out the mission. Turning on his phone, Kevin spectated the drone's view of the mansion. Frowning slightly, Kevin turned on the holographic function of his phone. Soon a three-dimensional perspective of the villa became visible. Pinching his fingers, he carefully scrutinized the layout of the area. The villa was relatively large, and it consisted of one main building surrounded by large cement walls. Around the villa, there was a large garden, filled with all sorts of flowers and plants, and next to it was a large maze. In the middle of the maze, there was a nice wooden pavilion surrounded by red and pink roses. Controlling the drone, Kevin moved it around the perimeter of the gate where several men dressed in black could be seen patrolling the area. Counting all of the people he could spot patrolling the mansion, Kevin turned on the thermal imaging camera to make sure he didn't miss anyone due to the darkness of the night. 15, 16, 17. As he counted, he couldn't help but frown. This many people just outside? Something told Kevin that something wasn't right. Click. Thinking for a bit, Kevin decided to deploy his mini scouting devices. Pressing on a button on his screen, several small devices dropped from the drone, landing softly on the garden's grass. Swiping left, Kevin switched the view from the drone's point of view to the mini scouting device's view. As he navigated the mini scouting devices with his phone, Kevin kept the drone in the air to monitor the surroundings. Just in case something happened. Quietly entering the villa, carefully controlling one of the small scouting devices, Kevin quietly looked through each room. After a couple of minutes of continuous scouting, Kevin stopped at what seemed to be his target's study room. Infiltrating the room through the small gap of the door, Kevin was able to see the inside of the room. In the middle of the room stood a large wooden desk with two white leather sofas positioned right in front of it. Behind the desk, there was a large window that overlooked the whole garden. A large carpet that seemed to have been made from real animal skin covered the whole floor, and around the room, multiple different paintings were displayed for people to see. Just as Kevin was about to check through the files on his target's desk, the scouting device picked up a few tremors coming from the ground. Frowning slightly, Kevin quickly hid the device from human view and turned on the cloaking function. Creak. Have all the preparations been made? Entering the room, a fat middle-aged man dressed in a red robe that had fine golden patterns looked behind him as he spoke. Accompanying him were several black-cloaked individuals who were all warily looking in the same direction the fat middle-aged man was looking. Kevin, who was watching from the scouting device, instantly identified the fat middle-aged man. Victor Hugh, his assassination target. Matching the description of his target with the image displayed on his screen, Kevin confirmed that he was in fact Victor. A few seconds after Victor entered the room, a towering man whose muscles were the size of a head entered the room. As he entered the room, his presence and demeanor completely overwhelmed everyone that was in the room. Only Victor remained relatively unfazed by the man's aura. PAMF. Slumping on his chair, Victor gestured for the towering man to sit on one of the sofas opposite to him. Sitting down, the tall man spoke. Mr. Oliver has already entered the premise and is currently in talks with Secretary Chun with regards to securing a new supply route. Within an hour we should be able to finalize a deal with them. Hearing the name Oliver being mentioned, Victor's face became dark. Oliver? The guy that monopolized most trading routes in Hallberg? Nodding his head, the tall man confirmed. Yes. Frowning slightly, Victor tapped his finger on the table and asked. Has the security around here been tightened? Nodding his head, the tall man said. Yes, we have hired a couple of extra guards. Though only 2 are decent, ranking at F rank. Holding his almost non-existent chin with one of his fingers, Victor remained silent for a bit before saying what had been bugging his mind for the past 2 days. Say, were there any unusual activities coming from the students that came from the lock? Lightly chuckling, the tall muscular man who seemed to have seen through Victor's worries spoke. Even if they did move, I would doubt a bunch greenies like them would be able to get past me. Forcing a smile, Victor shook his head. It's not that simple. What if it's one of the professors who targets me? Even you, an ranked individual, would stand no chance against one of the professors there. Leaning back against the sofa, the tall man crossed his arms and frowned. What you say does indeed make sense, but have you ever wondered? Would the lock, the world's leading academy, stoop so low and target you? Someone who couldn't even be put on the radar by weaker forces? Looking back at Victor, he continued. I'd understand it if you were some big-shot crime boss, but you're merely a finance minister of a still-developing city. There's no way they would send a professor for the likes of you. Worst-case scenario, they will just send a student, which in all said and done are not worth mentioning in front of me. Hearing what the tall man sitting before him was saying, Victor felt a bit more reassured, but he still couldn't completely hide his worry. Yeah, but they are from the lock. Smirking, a black glow started emanating from the tall man's body. Soon an overbearing pressure bore down on everyone in the room. You think a bunch of students that have no real combat experience, let alone have ever killed someone, are a match for me? Feeling the massive pressure bearing down on him, Victor quickly apologized. And no, I'm sorry, I am just nervous. Noticing that he had taken things a bit too far, the tall man removed the pressure and said. When the time comes and if they really do show up, I'll show you the difference between me and them. Standing up, the tall man looked at Victor and said. You felt it just now, didn't you? My power. Victor, who was still recovering from the pressure the tall man had exerted before, nodded his head and said. I did. So there's nothing to be particularly worried about. Seeing how confident the tall man before him was, Victor bitterly smiled and said. Sigh, all right. There's a reason why I pay you so much, Elder. Well, for someone like me the amount you're paying could be considered a bargain. Stopping mid-sentence, Elder looked at the right side of the room. Squinting his eyes, he moved closer towards the edge of the wall of the room. What's this? Picking up a small device that was the size of a coin, the small device's color soon distorted from being the same color as the wall to slowly changing to the same skin tone as Elder's fingers. Cryic. Pinching the small device, Elder looked at Victor and darkly said. Victor, start evacuating. Taken aback by Elder's sudden change in demeanor, Victor's voice trembled as he looked at Elder. What happened? Looking at the powder in his hands, which used to be the small device he picked up, Elder slowly said. We have been breached. BZZZTTT. Staring at his screen that had gone completely static, Kevin slowly removed his cashmere jacket and carefully placed it on top of the bike. Extending his hand to the right, a slick slender sword suddenly appeared in his hand. Unsheathing the sword, Kevin slowly traced his finger along the cold metal body of the blade. "It's nice to see you again." Sheathing the sword back into the scabbard and placing it right below his waist, Kevin looked at the villa before him. Taking a deep breath, Kevin activated his F-ranked skill F, Mind Cleansing. As soon as he activated the skill, Kevin felt his head become clearer. Everything that he had previously seen on the drone became a bunch of variables that his mind slowly accounted for. Slowly, a plan started formulating inside of his mind. A plan that dictated the fastest route and way he could use to get to where Victor was, and swiftly get rid of him. Foo. Releasing a long breath, a couple of seconds after activating the skill, Kevin deactivated it. As soon as he deactivated his skill, veins started popping on his forehead as they pulsated constantly. Frowning, Kevin stopped himself from displaying any reaction and endured the pain that came along with using the skill. After a couple of seconds, everything returned back to normal, and the pain disappeared. Despite having only used the skill for a couple of seconds, it still did a number on him, however it wasn't for nothing. Now, he knew what the fastest and safest way to kill Victor was. Closing his eyes, slowly, his figure melted into the darkness. Let the hunt begin. Chapter 61, I am Kevin Voss, 3. Spurt. Appearing behind one of the guards patrolling the area, Kevin swiftly and silently slit his throat. Dragging the guard's corpse behind a bush, Kevin came back out wearing a black uniform and a hat. On his right pec, a white name tag rested on the uniform. After scouting all of the guards from the drone, Kevin had a general idea of the guard's movement pattern. Turning right, Kevin passed by another guard that was patrolling not so far away from where he was. Nodding his head to greet Kevin, the guard moved past Kevin. Spurt. Swiftly appearing behind the guard and silently slitting his throat, Kevin dragged his body away. Coming back out, Kevin replaced his previous name tag with the one of the guard he had just killed. The reason for his action was because certain guards were only allowed to patrol certain areas. If they found out that the guard that was supposed to be patrolling the outside perimeter was outside their designated area, they would no doubt become suspicious. Though he knew his plan wasn't going to last long, he would at least like to reach a certain point before bulldozing his way towards his target. Realistically, remaining hidden was not an option, but it's not like Kevin cared. He was that confident in his skill. Entering the villa, Kevin lowered the hat he was wearing, masking his face. Right now Kevin had to operate fast. His target already knew that he was on his tail. Previously, he had sent several scouting devices inside of the villa, and thus he knew exactly where Victor was hiding. However, despite the fact that their cloaking function was fairly good, they had all already been seen through by someone. Kevin estimated that whoever found the devices was at least rank, if not even rank. Only someone of that caliber could detect his scouting devices so quickly. Though he knew there was going to be someone of that level as the system had already warned him beforehand, he had to confirm for himself. And now he knew. Increasing his pace, Kevin walked in the direction of where he last detected Victor. He knew he couldn't waste any time. If he let the target escape, the next time he tried to assassinate him, chances were that he would be more prepared. Even worse, he would hide until Kevin had no choice but to return to the academy, preventing him from completing the mission. He had to kill him now at all costs. If not, there was not going to be a second chance. Turning left of the hall, Kevin passed by two guards who seemed to be in a rush. Hey! Hearing someone shouting in his direction, halting his steps, Kevin kept looking at the front. Morrison, what are you doing here? Jogging to where Kevin was, one of the guards looked at Kevin suspiciously. You shouldn't be here. We just got an emergency message regarding someone infiltrating the premise KH. Just as the guard was about to finish speaking, Kevin subtly looked at his name tag Leo and swiftly stabbed his heart. Supporting Leo's lifeless body with one arm so that he remained standing, Kevin pretended to converse with him. Halfway through his conversation, Kevin slightly loosened the grip of Leo's body, and it slowly sank in his direction. I know, someone ordered me to. Hey? Leo, are you okay? What's going on? Noticing something strange, the other guard that was accompanying Leo, whom Kevin had just killed, jogged in Kevin's direction. Using his shoulder to mask the blood that was slowly seeping from Leo's body, Kevin flusteredly spoke. I don't know. I was just talking to him when he suddenly just passed out in front of me. Hey, Leo. Arriving next to Leo, the guard gave him a gentle tap. Noticing a small red stain on the ground, the guard instantly felt that something wasn't right, but before he could react, a silver streak of light appeared before his heart. Spurt. Thud. Thud. Knowing that his cover would be blown any second, Kevin sprinted towards where Victor was hiding. Hey! Hey! As he was running, he met a couple of guards that tried to block his way. However, it was all futile. Stepping on the side of the wall, Kevin stabbed his sword in their direction. Noticing Kevin's action, the two guards immediately tried to block Kevin's attack. But suddenly out of nowhere, the sword that they assumed was coming from the front suddenly appeared on the side, completely catching them off guard. Spurt. Thud. Killing one of the guards, using the momentum he had from having propelled himself off the wall, Kevin somersaulted in the air and slashed towards the other guard. Flustered, the guard tried to block Kevin's attack, but similarly to the first guard, just as the sword was about an inch away from him, it suddenly appeared in a completely different direction, completely catching him off guard. Spurt. Thud. Without looking back, Kevin continued running and killing guards left and right as he bulldozed his way towards where Victor was. Stop right there. Just as Kevin was about to reach the room Victor was hiding in, a large towering man appeared before him, obstructing his path. A large pressure emanated from his body. Stopping, Kevin looked at him and said, "So you must be the one who found my scouters." Without answering Kevin, the towering man looked at him up and down. Frowning, a trace of astonishment appeared on his face. E rank? How's this possible? You should be worried about something else instead of my rank. Appearing before Elder, Kevin drew his sword and slashed in his direction. You dare! Clang! Before Kevin's sword could hack at Elder, a giant axe appeared in his hand, perfectly blocking his attack. Catch! Taking a couple of steps back, Elder hacked his axe on the ground to stop himself from moving further backwards. Regaining his bearing, Elder solemnly looked at Kevin. To be able to push me this far back, you're not half bad. Schwa! Without answering Elder, Kevin appeared on his left side and stabbed towards his head. Just as Elder was about to block Kevin's sword attack, midway through his motion he stopped and redirected his axe to the left side of his body. Kryak! KHHH! Barely managing to block Kevin's attack, Elder's axe grazed Kevin's sword. Though he managed to stop Kevin from stabbing him in the liver, a large gash appeared on his body. What kind of sword art is that? Dumbly looking at his wound, Elder looked at Kevin, who was a few steps away from him. Ignoring Elder, Kevin once again attacked. Schwa! Crick! Staring at the sword coming in his direction intently, Elder once again managed to barely deflect his attack. KHHH, damn it. Holding on the side of his body, Elder took a quick potion from his pocket and downed it. Slowly, his injuries started healing. Schwa! Appearing on Elder's right side, Kevin's sword hacked towards his head, and a whistle arose as the sword split the air. Clank! Firmly blocking Kevin's true attack that was heading towards his heart, a smirk appeared on Elder's face. You think I wouldn't be able to block it after the second time? Using his enormous frame, Elder pushed Kevin back. Hoo-ah! Raising his axe in the air, Elder firmly hacked it towards Kevin's direction. Sidestepping, Kevin tried to avoid the attack, however, midway through the air, Elder's axe twisted to the side in a J motion. Clank! Blocking the attack, Kevin felt all the bones in his body vibrate from the clash. Again. Raising his axe again, Elder once again hacked. Shua! Frowning, with his right hand holding the grip of the sword and his left hand holding the body of the sword, Kevin followed the axe's movement and redirected it to the ground. Bomb! Breaking the marble floor into millions of pieces, a large cloud of dust swept the area. Noticing the slight opening, Kevin decided to act. Swiftly turning the tip of his sword, a whistle arose. Kevin's momentum suddenly changed. His gentle attacks from before were long gone, and what replaced them were fiercer and heavier strikes that overwhelmed Elder. Following the heavier strikes, Kevin's sword became even harder to trace as every single one of his attacks would look like the real deal. He would occasionally pretend to do a feint when in fact there was none. This was so that he could destroy Elder's mentality, increasing the chances of him making a mistake. Elder, who was under the barrage of attacks, could barely hold on as he used his giant axe as a shield. The fact that he couldn't rely on his sight made things that much harder for him. He had to pay extra close attention to the sound the sword made in the air, else he wouldn't know where the sword was coming from. KHHH, damn it. As he was being pushed back, Elder grit his teeth. Looking at Kevin, whose momentum was increasing by the second, Elder, who knew that this couldn't keep going anymore, decided to use his strongest move and end things. You leave me no choice. Suddenly, a black glow emanated from Elder's body as his muscles started bulging from his body. Kevin, who noticed these changes, immediately attacked him more fiercely, but it was to no avail as Elder, who was struggling before, was starting to defend his attacks more accurately. He's using something similar to overdrive. Stopping his frontal attacks, as he knew it was useless, Kevin decided to rely on his agility and swiftly moved behind Elder's thick body. Noticing Kevin moving behind him, Elder turned around at an astonishing speed. The giant axe in his hands was covered in a thick black glow before Kevin knew it, and along with it, a supremely fierce and immense pressure bore down on Kevin, who was caught off guard. Wham! As soon as the axe slashed horizontally, Kevin felt the air and the surroundings vibrate intensively. It was so fast that it was impossible to dodge. Seeing that he couldn't dodge, Kevin met the axe head-on. Clang! A large shockwave swept the surroundings. Taking 10 steps back, Kevin felt an iron-like taste in his mouth. Spurt! After a couple of seconds, Kevin couldn't hold it anymore and spat a mouthful of blood. Whoop-ah! Before Kevin had enough time to catch his breath, Elder's giant axe came swinging from above. Gotcha! Narrowly dodging the attack by a hair's breadth, Kevin saw the giant axe split the marble floor into dozens of pieces. In the end, I have to use it, huh? Looking at Elder, who was preparing himself for another swing, Kevin closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Overdrive. As if all of his muscles had been rejuvenated, Kevin felt an unprecedented power rise from deep within him. Tensing his calves, Kevin appeared behind Elder. Thud. Slashing upwards, a head flew in the air and a massive body fell flat on the ground, sending debris all over the place. KHHHHHH. Deactivating overdrive, Kevin's muscles spasmed continuously. The pain was so strong that he barely managed to stop himself from passing out. In the end, he had to use overdrive. The side effects of using overdrive were currently too much for him. If not for the fact that he had no choice but to use it, he would have never used it. In the end, despite being stronger than Elder, his experience was still far lower than his. He wanted to win without needing to use overdrive, but in the end, without it, he wouldn't have been able to win. Gulp. 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 Gulping down a couple of potions, Kevin felt a little bit better, well enough to stand up. Looking around, Kevin walked towards Elder's headless body. Shaw. Slashing towards Elder's hand, Kevin took it and headed towards a large wooden door. Beep. Placing his finger on the lock in front of the door, Kevin waited for the door to open before entering. Waiting on the other side of the door, Victor stood up and let out a sigh of relief. Only Elder can unlock the door, this means he succeeded, right? Click. As the door fully extended, Victor's smile froze as he saw two scarlet red eyes staring in his direction.
Hi.
Who are you? Slumping backwards, Victor trembled as he crawled backwards, as far away from Kevin as possible. Who am I? Looking at Victor's sorry figure, Kevin smirked. Extending his hand upward, he slowly hacked in his direction. Slash. Thud. Watching Victor's fat head rolling on the floor, Kevin slowly said, I am Kevin Voss. Chapter 62, Resolve 1. They say humans were adaptable creatures. Presented with an external scenario that changed their behavioral pattern or ways of life, humans were creatures that were able to adapt to the new changes presented to them. Compared to the other races, humans didn't have anything in particular that stood out for them. Dwarves were smart, elves had a high affinity with mana, and orcs had strong constitutions. Humans had none of that. They didn't have the dwarves' intelligence, the elves' strong affinity with mana, nor did they have physiques as strong as the orcs. They were merely a bunch of evolved primates in the eyes of the three races. Yet, after around 70 years, to the surprise of the three races, humanity had almost caught up with them. Though they weren't particularly outstanding in a single area, after adapting to the new changes around them, they were able to swiftly become a powerhouse that could comfortably defend their territory from the likes of demons and the other races. It all came down to how they were able to adapt to the changes presented before them. They didn't need to be the smartest. They didn't need to have a high affinity to mana, nor did they need to have strong constitutions like the orcs. Though they wouldn't come close to the level of orcs, elves, and dwarves, humans were able to control mana, have strong physiques, and come up with new technology and theories that further increase their knowledge. Adaptability. Though it sounded dull, it was probably what made humans so scary. Sitting in front of a cafe, sipping on some iced latte whilst listening to my MP3, I looked outside the window. 2 days have passed since I had been assigned the mission by the academy. Surprise, surprise, Kevin completed it on the same night as he got his mission assigned. Show off. Jokes aside, past the first day, most people had already completed their missions. A couple of students got injured and some even nearly died, but due to some sheer luck, no one died. Though I could have been like them and done the task on the first day, I decided against doing so. There was a reason for my action. For one, completing the task so fast would definitely arouse suspicion from the professors, and two, I just needed some time to sort my state of mind. It's been about 2 months since I had reincarnated into my late novel, and despite having seen all sorts of terrible things, I still couldn't quite grasp the concept of death. I've sort of forced myself to not think about it. Even after I killed Elijah back in the after party, I wasn't affected much due to the effects of a monarch's indifference. But that was merely a way for me to cope. In order to cope, I lied to myself into making myself think that the person who killed Elijah wasn't me, but another version of me that was under the effect of monarch's indifference. I knew this wasn't good for me, but if I didn't do so, my mentality would have long crumbled. Biting the top of my latte cup, I looked at the foremost notification on my phone. Time left until mission expires, 01D, 02H, 17M, 24S. Now, I was once again presented with a scenario where I had to kill someone. My first thought when I got the mission was, let's use Monarch's Indifference. If I used that skill, I wouldn't have to worry about having nightmares for a week. However, after a bit of thinking, I decided against doing so. I needed to get used to death. I needed to acknowledge the fact that I was no longer on Earth, but inside of my novel where the morals were completely different from the world I used to live in. It was hard. It was very hard. Though I've tried multiple times already, the morals that had been engraved in me for 32 years of my life couldn't just be thrown away in the drain as I wished. It just wasn't possible, but that didn't mean this couldn't change in the future. Though I may not be able to get used to killing immediately, there will eventually come a time where I would finally be indifferent towards killing. Though it was going to be hard, it wasn't impossible. All I needed to do was adapt. Plap. Placing my now empty latte down, I stood up and left the cafe. Resolutely looking at the counting timer on my phone, I headed back towards the mansion so that I could get all preparations done. Today I would try to consciously kill without the aid of Monarch's Indifference. Though I knew this day would eventually come, it didn't stop me from feeling a hint of anxiety creep into my heart. Killing without the aid of anything. That was my resolve. 10 p.m. Outside a venue filled with people, I stood on top of the opposite building quietly scouting the perimeter of the venue. Inside of the venue I was looking at, a masquerade party was being held. People wearing masks dancing and chatting could be seen everywhere. This was quite inconvenient for me as I had a hard time finding my target because of this. The masquerade party was a celebratory party in commemoration of the building's opening. The host of the party was my current target, Carl Czar. According to the files I had been sent, my target was the head of a minor drug organization that sold and traded potent drugs into Hallberg. Despite the fact that the organization he controlled was small, he earned a hefty amount of money. Enough to afford a whole building. The building he just bought was merely a building he had bought so that he could show off his wealth to the others, and it was one of the many other properties he owned. After looking carefully, I was finally able to spot my target. Despite the fact that everyone was wearing a mask, my target was surprisingly easy to spot. Wearing a gold mask that only covered his eyes, Carl had a group of people following him. They were probably his bodyguards. Frowning slightly, I thought something was strange. He was being too obvious. Despite this being a masquerade party, he didn't try to hide who he was. If he wasn't as obvious, I would have probably had a harder time spotting him. Maybe he caught wind of what was happening these past few days. I thought as I looked at it from a different perspective. If so, it made sense. I mean, who wouldn't become more cautious after seeing a lot of big shots disappear in a matter of days? He was currently living his days not knowing whether he would be one of those people that disappeared overnight. I too would have become paranoid. Looking at Carl's figure walking around to the venue accompanied by the many bodyguards, I measured the distance between us. In terms of distance, I was probably about a couple 100 meters away. Though it wasn't far, it was also not close. I needed to kill him before he left for good. If he managed to leave before I could kill him, I may not be able to find another good time to kill him. In any case, my job today was simple. I just had to wait for my target to leave before killing him. 11 p.m. The sun had already long set and what replaced it was the gentle moonlight that lit the surrounding streets. The street lanterns brightly lit the streets of Hallberg as occasionally a few cars would drive by in the distance. The masquerade was nearing its ending stages. Luxurious cars arrived at the venue one by one, and people adorned in fancy dresses and masks filled with strange patterns exited the building and entered the cars that soon drove into the distance. As they left, the roaring sound of the car's engine could be heard not so far from where I was standing. 11:30 p.m. A black limousine arrived in front of the party venue. Soon, 2 people exited the building and made their way towards the limousine. Seeing the 2 people leave the premises, I instantly became alert and prepared for what was to come. My target Karl Czar had finally left the venue. Though I could have killed him while he was still at the venue, there was a high chance things were going to get troublesome if I were to kill him in front of everyone. In the end, I could only wait for him to exit the building and attack then. Just as I was about to make my move, I halted and looked at Karl. Taking off his mask, Karl's figure suddenly morphed to the figure of a young man in his 30s. Opening my eyes wide, abruptly turning my head left, I could see a black car speeding off in the distance. Shh! *T, I've been had. This guy was much more Catayans than I had anticipated. After a lot of big shots disappeared over the last 2 days, noticing that something was strange, Karl took no chances and heavily invested in security as well as methods to avoid being assassinated. The guy who was pretending to be him was most likely wearing a top skin mask that lasted for a couple of hours, meaning that after the time was up the mask would no longer function. Staring at the black car that was speeding off into the distance, a smirk appeared on my face. His plan was honestly quite good, too bad he was currently being targeted by me. Prior to coming here, I did a thorough investigation of the nearby areas. I had memorized every single street in the nearby radius. And I knew exactly which road he was going to take. Jumping off the building I was on, I softly landed on the ground and sped towards the distance. Turning left and right of a couple of buildings, I increased my pace even further. It was a race against time. Because his main house was in the opposite direction, I knew exactly which road he was going to take to get back home. Though it may look like they shook me off, I already knew that our paths were bound to cross very soon. Let's see if you can really escape from my grasp. Chapter 63, Resolve 2. Swiftly moving around the alleys of Hallberg, taking out my phone, I quickly checked the map of the surroundings. Despite not knowing the current position of the car, I could estimate how long it would take for it to reach the main road that was a few blocks away from my current position. If things were going as I predicted, in approximately 15 minutes they would reach the main road. Staring at the red dot on the map that marked my position, I lightly frowned and increased my speed. Fuck, I should definitely get a movement art after this. As I ran, I couldn't help but curse at my speed. Though my rank increased and my speed along with it, it felt as if I still lacked in the speed department. Fortunately, because I was directly cutting through the buildings to reach my destination, the distance that I covered was much less compared to the car, which needed to go through a couple of adjacent roads that connected to the main road. Huff, huff, this must be the right road. Panting heavily, after having run at full speed for 10 minutes straight, I supported myself with my knees and looked ahead. In front of me stood a deserted road that was dimly lit by the street's lamps that stood on the side of the road. The sidewalks were empty, and all the houses next to the road had their lights turned off. Checking my phone and confirming that I was at the right destination, I took out my MP3 and scrolled down my playlist. I needed something to take my mind off of what was to happen next. And what better way than through music? Let's go with this. Equals 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 equals. Moonlight Sonata. Beethoven. Midnight, 1500 hours. Plus volume. Equals 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 equals. Feeling the breeze of the night, I stood in front of the deserted road. V-room. About time. As soon as I pressed the play button of my MP3, on the opposite side of the road, a black car sped in my direction. Glancing at the oncoming car, I closed my eyes and savored the music that was playing in my ears. Foo. Beep. Beep. Ignoring the beeping coming from the incoming car, letting out a long breath, I channeled my mana at the tip of my sword and drew a circle in the air. Slowly a yellow translucent circle appeared in front of me. Following the first circle, I drew a second and a third one. Go! Stacking them up together, I pushed them towards the incoming vehicle. Vroom! Screech! Noticing the circles heading their way, the car screeched and swerved to the side as the driver tried to avoid the rings. However, it was too late. Despite the driver's attempt to dodge the circles, they still hit the car on its backside, causing it to spin a couple of times before slamming against a street light. Bomb! Not bad. Staring at my now scattering rings, I couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. Prior to coming to Hallberg, my circles could only last for 2 seconds and had no substance to them. After having come to Hallberg, I didn't stop training once. Although the amount of time I trained was cut considerably, it didn't stop me from improving my second sword art, Ring of Vindication. And thanks to that, though I didn't manage to increase the time the rings could remain in the air, I managed to add substance to them. Meaning that right now, hitting a ring was the same as hitting real matter. And because I managed to hit the car on its backside, I disrupted its momentum, causing it to spin and crash against the pole. This technique was essentially a similar tactic to the pit maneuver that police used, but without the need for me to use another car. Plaque. Shit. Opening the door of the car, a rather handsome individual with short brown hair and green eyes came out. Looking around and noticing me standing in the middle of the road, the handsome individual's eyes narrowed. So you must be one of those rats sent from the lock. Behind him, 4 more individuals exited the vehicle. They all wore nice black suits, and apart from a few shards of glass on their clothes, they seemed to be relatively unharmed. Glancing behind him, the young individual felt a surge of confidence rise from within him as he started speaking with more confidence. I've long known that I was a possible target. I hoped that it wouldn't have come to this, but it seems that in the end, you pests from the lock are planning of cleansing the whole of Hallberg. Nudging at the guards behind him to come forward, the handsome individual smiled and said, "I'll give you a chance, leave now before things get serious." Removing one of my earpieces, I shook my head and looked at the handsome individual who hid behind his 4 bodyguards. "I'm afraid I'd have to disappoint you there, Mr. Czar. You see, if I don't kill you, there's a high chance I might fail my year." It was true. Because my theoretical grades were absolute garbage, if I didn't complete this mission, there was a high chance I would fail this course. Simply put, I had no other option but to complete this mission. Frowning, Karl Czar's face crumpled as he darkly said, "I gave you a chance, but you blew it." Signaling with his fingers to 3 of the 4 guards before him, instantly 3 ranked auras erupted, enveloping the street and me. "Since you leave me no choice, I guess you must die." Feeling the 3 auras directed in my direction, I remained indifferent. Putting my earpiece back into my ear, I channeled the mana inside of my body and accustomed myself to the pressure coming from the 3 guards. Ignoring the 3 ranked individuals, my eyes never once drifted away from the 4th member that kept standing next to Karl. Similar to the other 3 guards, he was wearing a black suit. He had long black hair that fell right onto his shoulders, and his angular face looked extremely vicious. Though he was hiding it, he was ranked. His entire presence was drastically different compared to the other 3. It felt as if a vicious python was staring at me, ready to strangle me at any moment. He was on another level. Noticing my indifferent expression, Karl frowned and looked at the guard that was standing next to him. Glancing at Karl, the guard nodded his head and stepped forward. Vroom. Instantly a pressure that was on a different level compared to the 3 guards engulfed the entire street. Taking out a dagger from his pocket, the guard smiled as he slowly licked the blade of the dagger. "It's been a while since I've had some fun." Seeing his strongest guard move, Carl felt a wave of confidence wash over him as he commanded the other guards. "Kill him." Hearing Carl's command, the 3 ranked guards instantly moved and ran in my direction. Staring at the guards coming in my direction, my eyes slightly darted towards the ranked guard who was behind them. Though it looked like he was not going to attack, I knew that he was most probably going to attack me when I least expect it. He was probably going to attack as soon as he saw an opening. Therefore, Foo. Releasing a long breath, my ranked aura instantly enveloped the entire street as white light started emanating from my body. Tapping on my sword, a bright white light instantly engulfed the whole street. The second movement of the keiki style, horizon-splitting slash. Click. Thud. 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 As soon as the light died down, 3 heads could be seen rolling on the floor. Biting my lips and not looking back, I stared at Carl and the other guard. I just consciously killed 3 people. Despite trying my best to not show it, my mind was currently in a state of turmoil. Guilt, shame, anger, resentment, many emotions constantly came and went inside of my mind as I desperately struggled to keep my mind intact. I couldn't crumble yet. At least not until I finished my mission. WW just happened? Staggering a few steps backward, Carl almost fell over as he looked at the heads of the 3 guards on the floor. Staring at his remaining guard, Carl weakly said, "Edmund, why you can kill him rig HT?" Hearing Carl's voice and recovering from his surprise, the ranked guard, Edmund, licked his lips and nodded. This might be more entertaining than I thought. Dashing in my direction, Edmund stabbed his dagger in the direction of my throat. Looking at Edmund coming my way, I instantly dashed a few steps back and drew a circle in the air with my sword. Like a snake, the dagger coursed through the air at incredible speeds as it made its way towards my direction. Clank! Hacking at the circle, it soon broke into millions of pieces, and the dagger soon appeared before my eyes. Looking at the dagger that was only a few inches away from my face remained indifferent. Though the circle didn't manage to block the attack, it didn't matter because all I wanted was to buy myself enough time to regain my stance. Click! Clank! Quickly repelling the dagger with my sword, I shoulder tackled Edmund and took a few steps back. KHHH. Pushed back, Edmund smiled savagely as he said, "Not bad." Flicking the dagger in the air, Edmund switched it to his left hand and once again dashed in my direction. Noticing him heading my way, I quickly drew 3 circles in the air. Stacking them together, I pushed them in the direction of where the dagger was coming from. I needed to buy myself more time. I needed 5 seconds. 5 seconds to be able to accumulate enough wind scions to coat my sword and use the first movement of the keiki style, quick flash. Only through that move could I kill him. 1. Futile trick. Seeing the 3 circles heading in his direction, a green glow covered Edmund's body as he flicked his dagger in the air and grabbed it with both his hands before stabbing at the circles. Crash. 2. As if the tree circles were made of paper, they instantly broke into a million particles. Shh! *T. Staring at the dagger headed in my direction, I bit my lips until blood fell on my chin and only moved slightly to the side. 3. Spurt. KHHH. Piercing my shoulder until the tip of the dagger could be seen appearing on the other side of my back, I stared at Edmund, who looked at me with an expression of shock. 4. You crazy bastard. Smiling slightly, I said.
Yeah.
I think so too. 5. The first movement of the keiki style, quick flash. Thud. KHHH, huff, huff. Grabbing my shoulder, which was bleeding heavily, I panted heavily as my vision blurred slightly.
Hi.
Don't come near me. Forcefully trying to regain my composure, I quickly headed towards my target, Karl Czar. Why you want money? Women? Fame? I can give you anything, please don't kill me. I don't want to die. Picking up one of the earpieces that fell off of one of my ears, I put it back on and ignored Karl's pleas. Arriving before Karl, I let out a long breath and raised my sword. Looking at his sorry state, I started hesitating a bit, but after thinking about all the horrible things he did from reading his report, I firmed my will and slashed down. Spurt. Thud. Wiping Karl's blood off of my face, I let out a long breath and stared at the moon that was surrounded by the stars. I guess I truly am a part of this world now. Chapter 64, What Will Happen, 1. Is that him? Did he really get injured over such a simple mission? He really does look weak. Aimlessly walking around the mansion, I ignored the whispers and stares coming from some of the students that I passed along the way. Yesterday night, after completing the mission, I returned to the mansion all battered up. My whole arm was bleeding profusely and my clothes were all torn. Though I didn't pass out, to the people who saw me return, it looked as if I had been through hell. Because I had some notoriety, news of my battered state spread across all of the students, and soon I became the hot topic of the first years. Because the missions that we got were not a secret from the other students, after a bit of digging, people immediately found out who my target was and news of me getting beat up by a ranked individual spread across the academy. In the end, this resulted in me becoming the butt of the jokes of the first years. Weakling. Loser. Trash. Walking along the corridor, I was called all sorts of defamatory names by everyone that saw me. On a normal day, I would have grumbled and cursed at the people talking crap about me, but today, staring at my hands, I recalled the moment when my sword reaped through the lives of multiple people at once. I killed. I didn't sleep throughout the whole night. Right now, to the people around me, I probably looked like a lifeless corpse that was aimlessly wandering around the mansion. My mind kept replaying the moments where I reaped through the lives of the 4 bodyguards. I could vividly recall Karl's pleading face as he begged for me to spare him. Foo. Letting out a long breath and staring at the ceiling of the corridor, I tried to calm my mind. What had happened already happened. There was no going back. I had killed and I needed to move on. This wasn't going to be the only time, and it sure as heck wasn't going to be the last time. This was the path that I had chosen for myself and thus had to take responsibility for my decisions. Moreover, there was something more important I needed to worry about. The massacre of Hallberg. The second big event in the first arc of the novel. Tomorrow at 9:45 p.m., the last day of the trip, when everyone was sleeping, an organized attack will happen. Though their primary targets were Kevin and the other weaker students weren't spared from their pursuit. Meaning that I was also not safe. Though I decided not to interfere, I needed to prepare myself for what was to come. Placing my hand on my chin, I fell into deep thought. First things first, I needed to memorize the whole building blueprint. I needed to find a good spot where I could get a good view of what was happening as well as attract the least amount of attention. The reason why I needed a good view of what was happening was so that I could overlook anything that deviated from the plotline. I didn't want another incident like the one with Amanda to happen. Fortunately, I had the mysterious book with me. With it, I could more or less tell if something outside of the norm was going to happen. If anything that deviated from the plotline happened, it was my job to prevent it at any cost. Secondly, I needed to quickly recover from the wounds that I had sustained yesterday. Despite the fact that I had healing potions, they couldn't heal all my injuries that quickly. Especially since my whole shoulder had been pierced and my shoulder muscles had been torn. I still needed a full day to completely heal my shoulder. Right now, the whole of my right hand hurt like hell. Just the slightest movement and I would get an electrifying pain coursing through my body. Though I could tough it out, I'd still prefer if I was in top condition for tomorrow. Lastly, I needed to sort out my mentality. As of right now, I wasn't in the right state of mind to be put through another scenario that required me to reap through lives. I just couldn't. Just the thought of me killing again was causing my hands to tremble uncontrollably. I was not ready mentally to go through such an experience again. In the end, I had already decided that for tomorrow I would use Monarch's Indifference throughout the whole event. Only after killing for the first time yesterday did I realize how many flaws I had, both combat and mentality-wise. I was too emotional. Despite me trying my best to get over the fact that I had killed someone, the thought of what future lay ahead of me and how many more lives I would take made me question my humanity. Was I right? Was everything that I was doing really okay? Was killing the correct answer? Conflicting thoughts continuously brewed inside of my mind as I tried to find the correct answer. In the end, I still had a long way to go before being able to confidently stand up against demons and villains. Sighing and ridding of all my distracting thoughts, I quickly headed to my room and started preparing for tomorrow. These are probably going to be the longest 2 days of my life. Bang! 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 Huff! Huff, huff. Standing shirtless inside of an empty room filled with training dummies, an extremely handsome individual stood in the middle of the room heavily panting for air. His perfectly honed body was drenched in sweat, and his eyes were bloodshot. Gulp. Downing a potion and recovering some of his stamina, the young individual quickly dashed before one of the training dummies and punched it with all his might. Die. 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 Bang. 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 Cursing and continuously punching the dummy until he ran out of air, small shockwaves spread throughout the room as the sound of the collision between his fists and the dummies reverberated around the place. Exactly 30 minutes after continuously hitting the dummies, the young individual laid on the floor heavily gasping for air. Staring at the ceiling, he clenched his jaw hard and he covered his eyes with his arm. Just what am I lacking? Recalling Kevin's achievements on the first night the mission was assigned, Jean couldn't help but feel a massive wall standing before him. It felt as if a wall that he couldn't climb was standing before him. No matter how much work he put in, he couldn't find any way to bridge the gap between himself and Kevin. Was Kevin that much more talented than him? Should he just accept the fact that Kevin was better than him? Damn it. Bang. Clenching his fist hard, Jean punched the floor hard. I can't accept this. Even if my talent is not as good as his, I have access to the best resources and facilities. This should be enough for me to be able to become better than him. Kevin, who was an orphan and had nothing, managed to surpass him who was born with a golden spoon? He couldn't accept it. There was no way he could accept it. Gulp. Recovering some of his energy, Jean immediately downed another potion and stood up. I will surpass you no matter what. Bang. Dashing towards one of the training dummies, he once again started training until he couldn't stand anymore. This process repeated continuously until his fists were both bloodied and bruised. In the end, only after passing out from overworking himself did he stop training. Inside a small cozy cafe, decorated with beautiful plants and old wooden tables and boards, 2 stunningly beautiful young girls sat facing each other. Sipping on some hot mocha, one of the 2 stunning girls that had short creamy brown hair looked at the girl in front of her and said, Say, Amanda, did you notice something strange happening these past few days? Glancing at Emma, Amanda frowned for a second before shaking her head. No. Really? Frowning for a bit, Emma's brow relaxed. Maybe it's just me. For the past few days, Emma had this sense of discomfort. She constantly felt as if someone was keeping an eye on her. It was sort of unsettling, but in the end, she could only think of it as her being paranoid. With all the things that were happening with the Parker family, she couldn't help but become more sensitive to her surroundings. Since she couldn't prove her deductions, she could only pray that it was just her misconception. Shaking her head and switching topics, Emma looked at Amanda and said, "By the way, did you hear about the latest rumor?" Tilting her head to the side, Amanda shook her head.
Yeah.
You're not the type to care about that sort of stuff." Realizing that Amanda didn't care about gossip or any of that stuff, Emma leaned back on her chair and softly mumbled, "Well, it's not like it's anything particularly exciting, just about the weird guy that sits on the left side of the class." Hearing the word weird and left side of the class, Amanda's eyebrow jumped slightly as she said,
Who?
Taken aback by Amanda's sudden interest, Emma looked at her strangely. "I'm not sure about his name, but he's the weird guy that sits on the left side of the class and always sheaths and unsheaths his sword in the middle of the training ground." Frowning her brows, Amanda said, "What about him?" Noticing something odd about Amanda's behavior, Emma squinted her eyes and said, "Why are you suddenly so interested? You usually don't care about this stuff." Realizing that she was being a bit too pushy, Amanda brushed it off and said, It's nothing much. He was in my elective food exploration, so I was just curious." Not believing her, Emma's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized Amanda. In the end, after seeing Amanda's indifferent face, she gave up and said, "It's nothing interesting, it's just that he is now nicknamed the weakest first year, and other stupid nicknames like that." Taken aback, Amanda couldn't help but raise her eyebrow as she repeated, "The weakest first year?" Nodding her head and seeing Amanda's confusion, Emma followed up, "Apparently this stemmed from the fact that some students saw him return all battered up last night, and after checking what mission he had, they found out that he only had to deal with a ranked nobody." Listening to Emma's talk, Amanda couldn't help but slightly frown. Just what was he thinking? The more she knew about him, the more mysterious he became. Coming back battered after going against a single ranked individual? Like hell, she would believe that. There was no way the same guy that killed Elijah, a ranked villain, could possibly get hurt from a ranked individual. He must have either faked his injury or something else must have happened. Hey, Amanda." Snapping Amanda out of her thoughts was Emma, who pouted at her. "You were the one who asked me to tell you about the rumors revolving around that student, and yet you're not even paying attention." Sorry." Shaking her head, Emma sighed and looked at her watch. "Well, whatever, it's about time we go back anyways." Standing up and putting on her jacket, she looked at Amanda and said, "Let's go." Nodding her head, Amanda stood up and left with Emma. Along the way, Amanda couldn't help but once again think of Rin, who had saved her during the after-party. Just what was his true goal? Chapter 65, What Will Happen, 2. Looking at the blueprints of the building through the holographic function of my tablet, I fell into deep thought. It was already the next day, and today was the day that the Massacre of Hallberg event would start. After running around the mansion all night yesterday, I finally managed to secure myself the blueprints of the building, and looking at them now, I couldn't help but think one thing. Big. The mansion was big. And when I mean big, I mean very big. If we exclude all of the outside facilities, the mansion was about the size of a football stadium. It had 5 levels, with the bottom level being a parking lot filled with multiple cars and the ground level being the place where the reception and dining hall were located. The first and second floors were where the guest rooms were located, with the professors staying on the second floor and the students on the first floor. The last floor had an outdoor swimming pool with training facilities that the students could use at any time of the day. Though they weren't as advanced as the ones in the lock, they were still equipped with state-of-the-art equipment such as gravity rooms and training dummies. Supporting my body with my arms on the table, I took a careful look at the blueprints of the building. I needed to carefully analyze all of the exits and entrance points of the building, where the closest and furthest exits from my location were located, as well as which areas were the most secure. Pinching the hologram to zoom, I carefully looked at the layout of floors 1 to 3. The goal of the assassins was to infiltrate the top 3 floors as well as the bottom floor. If I don't remember wrongly, at around 8 p.m. the assassins will infiltrate the mansion when the trip-end dinner banquet was being held. Their plan was to attack each student as soon as they returned back from the dinner banquet, meaning that by the time the banquet ended, the assassins' preparations were done. The stronger assassins will attack the professors so that they could hold them back and prevent them from helping the students. According to what I wrote in the novel, reinforcement will come exactly 1 hour after the attack, and it will be Donna who with her strength alongside another professor managed to single-handedly kill most of the assassins on the 2nd floor. So for 1 hour, the students' goal was to survive. After 1 hour, most of the assassins would have been mostly killed by Donna, who will then help Kevin and the rest. Though I said the goal was to survive for 1 hour, it was easier said than done. The assassins that attacked the students were ranked from 2 and were highly skilled and experienced. This meant that even if the students fought against an assassin of the equivalent rank, there was a high chance they would still lose due to their lack of experience. Fortunately for me, because no one knew about my strength, I could more or less quickly get rid of the people that were after me and surveil the situation carefully. Now the real question was, how do I proceed from then? Do I silently get rid of some of the assassins, or do I hide? I guess the first option wouldn't really be plausible since I need to take into consideration what my meddling would do. There was a chance I could screw up the plotline if I killed some of the assassins who were supposed to carry out an important role in this scenario. In the end, after thinking for a bit, I decided that the best option for me right now was to stay put, and only interfere was when I needed to defend myself. Excessive meddling on my part could cause future anomalies in the plotline, which could create unwanted scenarios like back in the after-party. Alright, I guess that's that. Checking my watch and seeing that it was already 6:30 p.m. I closed my tablet and headed for the shower. In 30 minutes' time, I needed to get dressed and head towards where the end-of-trip dinner was being held. Sighing, I could already imagine myself going through an hour of long boring speeches that seemed to go on forever. The funny thing was that during those boring speeches, assassins were infiltrating the building. Even if I wanted to warn them about the impending danger, chances were that they would scoff and laugh at me. I'd love nothing more but ignore all those long and boring speeches, but it's not like I could just say, "We are currently being surrounded by multiple assassins and a lot of us are going to die, so hurry up and finish your speeches and get ready to defend yourselves." Moreover, with my current reputation, there was a high chance no one would listen to me. In fact, I'd probably get ridiculed. Bastards. In the end, after taking a quick shower and changing into a set of new clothes, I headed towards the dining hall with heavy thoughts. Dining hall, 8:15 p.m. After infiltrating the facility and taking out the person responsible for communications, it's been about an hour since I entered the dining hall, and the world around me had turned black and white. I was having trouble keeping my mind focused. 1 hour. I went through 1 hour of roundabout speeches from different professors and representatives going on about how proud they were proud of us and what they learned throughout the trip. From how monsters were processed and from what they learned during their mission. I want to die. Who thought that giving such long speeches was a good idea? Quite honestly, I'd rather be attacked by multiple assassins at once rather than listening to any more of this gibberish. Sighing and looking left and right, I could see some students in similar situations, as they too seemed to be on the verge of passing out from boredom. After this long trip, I have seen the growth of a lot of you, and I can say with confidence that you are slowly shaping yourselves into becoming strong and capable heroes that will soon shoulder the heavy burden of protecting humanity from the demons. Raising his glass of wine, the current professor that was speaking looked at everyone and said, "It is with great pride and honor that I would like to end my speech saluting the future heroes of our world." Clap! 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 After finishing his speech, a wave of applause engulfed the entire dining hall, drowning all other sounds. I too clapped. But for an entirely different reason. "All right guys, calm down, calm down." Standing up, the professor of Class A-17 gestured for everyone to calm down. Connor Norvac. That was the name of the professor in charge of Class A-17, and despite not being a ranked hero, he was still a formidable S-ranked hero that even contributed in the defeat of a marquee-ranked demon. And from the way he carried himself, I could see how he defeated a marquee-ranked demon. He along with Donna slaughtered most of the assassins that stopped them from helping the students and would be instrumental in the future for a couple of events that involved Kevin. Looking at him, his presence completely engulfed the entire hall, making most of the students stop whatever they were doing. I too felt overwhelmed. It felt as if a massive bear was looking down on me, ready to rip my head off at any moment. His appearance reminded me of a Viking which I used to see in movies. He was about 2 meters tall and had massive broad shoulders. Below his nose was a long blonde beard that stopped halfway through his neck, and his sea blue eyes and long blonde hair that cascaded all the way to his back made him look quite handsome. His muscles, which were 3 times the size of mine, were extremely impressive, and his white t-shirt, which was too tight for his body, perfectly emphasized his bulky outline. Standing up and looking at everyone in the room and making sure that everyone was quiet, Connor's deep voice resounded across the hall. "I know that most of you are bored senseless from all those boring speeches. If I had to be honest, I too am on the verge of dying due to how boring they were." Stopping halfway, Connor paused and smiled as a wave of chuckles could be heard from multiple students and professors. "I will keep it short and make a short announcement." After waiting for the hall to become silent, Connor continued. "Your assignment work can be handed in right after you return from the trip, and that today, apart from relaxing and enjoying yourself, you don't have to do anything else. I don't want to go into too much detail regarding what you need to do, as you can just ask your professor regarding the details of the work. All I want you guys to know is that the deadline for your assignments is 2 days after the trip, and your group will be graded based on what you present." Looking around and seeing that everyone understood what he said, Connor smiled and said, "So in conclusion, please enjoy yourselves for the rest of the day. You deserve it. Clap. Clap. Clap." Finished speaking, Connor sat down and took a big gulp of his drink amidst the wave of applause coming from the students and professors. Soon after, all of the students dispersed and went to the buffet area, filling their plates with all sorts of delicious food. All right. Looking at the students heading towards the food area, I checked my watch and let out a long breath. It was currently 8:30 p.m. and in a little bit more than an hour, the event was going to start. If I said I wasn't nervous, that would be a lie. It felt as if a million butterflies were fluttering inside of my stomach, making me lose my appetite. Looking around and seeing all the students and professors joyfully laughing and chatting with each other, a small part of me felt guilty. A lot of them will die. And despite me knowing that, I didn't do anything to stop it. I guess this was the price I had to pay as the author of this novel. Gulp. Taking a cup of wine from one of the waiters, I gulped it all in one go.
Ha!
Staring at the empty glass in my hands, I thought, I really need some proper alcohol. 9:30 p.m. 15 minutes to go. The way back to my room seemed to be much longer than ever before. Each step I took seemed heavier than the other, almost as if lead was stuck on them. Looking behind me, at the students who were returning at the same time as me, I bit my lip and continued making my way towards my room. It was finally time, the moment I dreaded since coming on this trip. The massacre of Hallberg. An event that resulted in a quarter of the first years to die, and one of the biggest events that contributed to the growth of the main protagonists. An event that will shock the whole human domain, and result in the lock becoming heavily scrutinized by the media. In the end, what will happen will happen. Arriving in front of my room and placing my hand on the doorknob, I let out a long breath. Phoo. This was it, I thought. Once I opened this door, the event was going to start. A couple of assassins would ambush me as soon as I opened the door, and from there the rest of the students would too be faced with a similar situation. Closing my eyes and activating Monarch's Indifference, I slowly opened the door. Click! Chapter 66, The Massacre of Hallberg 1. Click! Closing the door behind him, Ren stood in front of the door. The room was dark, and apart from his breathing, no other sound could be heard. Standing in front of the door, Ren looked at the narrow corridor that led to the living room of the small apartment. Click! Turning on the lights whilst keeping an eye on the living room, Ren slowly took off his shoes. Though he couldn't see the whole living room due to the corridor narrowing his line of sight, Ren knew that hiding inside of the living room were assassins waiting for him to enter. Looking left and right, Ren summoned his sword and channeled his mana towards the tip of his sword. Oof, I am so stuffed. I can barely move, guess I'll quickly head to bed. Making small talk at the entrance of the room, a translucent ring slowly formed in front of him. Voom. As soon as the ring fully formed, Ren pushed it forwards. Slowly, the ring moved towards the living room. Schwa. Schwa. As soon as the ring crossed the corridor and entered the living room, two black-clad silhouettes appeared out of nowhere and attacked the ring. Crack. Breaking into a million particles, the ring scattered in the air. Staring at the particles scattering in the air for a split second and noticing something wrong, the two silhouettes immediately turned towards the entrance of the room. Tap, tap, tap. Appearing from the other side of the living room, Ren's indifferent figure walked out. Expressionlessly looking at the two black-clad individuals, Ren took a stance as a white glow emanated from his body. Nodding towards the two silhouettes, Ren placed his hand on the grip of his sword. Click! The second movement of the Keiki-style, horizon-splitting slash. Voom! As if a bolt of lightning had descended, a bright light illuminated the room and a horizontal white streak of light appeared on the necks of the two silhouettes. Before the silhouettes could make out what was happening, they felt their world turn upside down as they slowly saw their headless bodies standing upright before them. Thud. Thud. Click. Removing his hand from the sword, Ren apathetically walked towards his room, ignoring the two heads rolling on the floor. Along the way, his shoulder twitched a couple of times, but he ignored it. Though his injury still wasn't fully healed, with the effects of a monarch's indifference, he could ignore the pain that was coursing through his shoulder. Heading towards the nightstand next to the bed, Ren opened the drawer and took out a red leather book. Deactivating Monarch's Indifference, to save mana, Ren felt his emotions return to him. KHHHH. As his emotions returned, Ren's face repeatedly changed as he felt his shoulder twitch uncontrollably. Taking a minute to suppress the pain, Ren opened the red book and read through its contents. Clank. 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 Surrounded by three black-cloaked individuals, Kevin swiftly moved around his apartment, hacking at them with his sword whenever he saw an opening. Clank. KHHH. Parrying Kevin's sword, one of the black-clad individuals signaled to the other two people to attack at the same time. Noticing their sign, Kevin forcefully twisted his body and defended against two attacks coming from his left and right side. Clank. Clank. KHHH. Barely blocking the attacks, Kevin took a few steps back as beads of sweat dripped from his forehead. Looking at the three black-clad individuals before him, Kevin couldn't help but curse. Damn it. Whoever the trio was, they knew about his attack pattern and the sword art he used. From the way he attacked and his habits, they knew them all. It seemed that whoever they were, they had done their research on him and had come prepared. Frowning, Kevin continued to pressure the trio, but it was to no avail, as whenever he attacked, his feints would easily get read by them, blocking whatever he threw at them. Moreover, what made things worse for Kevin was that whenever they counterattacked, they managed to precisely and cleanly direct their attacks where he was most vulnerable, almost as if they knew where he was going to attack. The more Kevin fought, the more he realized how adapt to his fighting style they were. It was almost as if they had been trained precisely to counter him. It was to the point that they were coordinating perfectly with each other, defending exactly where his true sword intent showed up and attacking exactly when he was most vulnerable. Taking few steps back and looking at the trio, Kevin let out a long breath. Though he was in a bind, he remained calm. Normally, considering how difficult the situation was, Kevin would have already used overdrive by now. However, that was only if it was about a week ago. Now things were different. Vroom. Releasing his ranked pressure, Kevin's attacks became sharper and stronger whilst the trio's attacks started to become more sluggish and predictable. Dodging one of the attacks coming from the right, Kevin jumped in the air and stepped on the sword that came towards his left side, propelling his body in the air. Twisting his body in the air, Kevin channeled wind scions at the bottom of his feet and stepped on the air. Redirecting his body to the other side of one of the black-clad individuals, Kevin hacked his sword towards his head. Caught off guard, the black-clad individual tried to defend himself, but it was to no avail as Kevin's figure disappeared and reappeared right behind him, piercing him straight into the heart. Spurt. 1. Removing the sword from the black-clad individual's back, Kevin stared at the other remaining two individuals in the room. Tensing his calves, Kevin's body shot in their direction. Stabbing towards the black-clad individual on the left, a red glow slowly started emanating from Kevin's body. Seeing Kevin's sword coming in their direction, the black-clad individual on the left took a defensive stance whilst the other black-clad individual hacked in Kevin's direction. Just as the black-clad individual on the left was about to block Kevin's attack, Kevin forcefully twisted his foot and redirected his attack towards the guy on the right, catching them both off guard. Cry-yi. Grazing the black-clad individual on the right sword, Kevin tossed his sword to his other hand and stabbed it towards the guy on the left whilst simultaneously using his fist to punch the guy on the right in the stomach. Bomb. Curling his body due to the heavy punch from Kevin, the black-clad individual on the right dropped his sword and held his stomach in pain. Redirecting his attention towards the remaining black-clad individual, Kevin stabbed his sword in his direction. Clank. Parrying Kevin's sword, Kevin thrust his sword again towards his head. Expecting the sword to be redirected to his heart, the black-clad individual did not notice the slight glint in Kevin's eyes as his sword continued making its way towards his head, piercing him straight through his brain. Spurt. 2. Clank. Turning around, Kevin easily parried the attack coming from the other guy and kicked him in the stomach. Stepping back to avoid Kevin's foot, Kevin reappeared on the remaining black-clad individual's left flank and pierced him in the liver. Spurt. 3. Thud. Removing his sword from the body of the last black-clad individual, Kevin frowned and immediately headed towards the exit of his room. Though he wanted to check the bodies of the people that assaulted him, he could hear a commotion outside of his apartment. Despite being unsure of what was happening, he knew that something serious was currently happening outside of his room. Click. What's going on? Opening the door and exiting his room, Kevin couldn't believe the sight that laid ahead of him. Blood-curdling screams resounded across the whole first floor as the corpses of students and black-clad individuals could be seen sprawled everywhere. Clank. 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 The sound of metal clashing reverberated throughout the corridors of the first floor as students could be seen fighting for their lives everywhere. Multiple black-clad individuals appeared everywhere, attacking students from all sides as absolute mayhem shrouded the whole first floor. Kevin. Snapping Kevin out of his daze was Emma's distraught voice as she fought against multiple black-clad individuals with her short swords. Her perfect figure danced around them as her swords constantly clashed against their attacks. However, despite managing to hold her own against the black-clad individuals, Emma was on the verge of losing due to their numerical advantage. This was shown by how her movements were becoming more sluggish by the second. Spurt. Quickly dashing in Emma's direction, Kevin hacked towards the nearest black-clad individual, killing him instantly as his sword disappeared and reappeared on his neck. Spurt. 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 Like a Shura from hell, Kevin hacked and stabbed everyone in his way. Along the way, he would help a couple of students who were on the verge of getting killed by the black-clad individuals. Spurt. Huff, huff, you okay? After killing multiple black-clad individuals, Kevin appeared before Emma as he heavily panted for air. Huff, yes, thanks. Similarly gasping for breath and nodding her head, Emma's eyes darted all over the place as she looked at all of the battles happening around her. What's going on? Where are the professors? I don't know. Shaking his head, Kevin looked just as confused as Emma. Logically speaking, with everything that was happening around them, the professors would have already come down to help them, as they wouldn't stand there and just watch their students die. It had to be noted that a lot of the students here were sons and daughters of very influential figures. Their deaths would put a heavy burden on the lock, therefore, there was no way they wouldn't be here right now defending them. Yet with everything going on around them, they still weren't here. That only meant one thing. Thinking that far, Kevin clenched his fists and looked at Emma, who seemed to have had the same thought as him. They were on their own. Whoosh! 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 Snapping Emma and Kevin out of their thoughts, 3 streaks of lights appeared before them as 3 black-clad individuals not so far from where they were standing fell on the ground. Quickly turning her head and looking in the direction of where the arrows came from, Emma exclaimed, "Amanda!" Just as Emma was about to head in Amanda's direction, the sound of the air being sliced increased in frequency as more arrows continuously shot out from Amanda's direction. Whoosh! 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 As the arrows repeatedly shot from Amanda's quiver, they reminded Kevin and Emma of a swarm of locusts that devastated ecosystems. Spurt! 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 With each arrow that left Amanda's bow, a black-clad individual fell on the ground. Some of the black-clad individuals managed to parry Amanda's arrows whilst others couldn't. In the end, as soon as Amanda ran out of arrows, the hall was quiet as most of the black-clad individuals were either dead or seriously injured. Running towards Amanda, Emma said, "Hey, Amanda, have you seen Jean and Melissa?" Putting her bow down, Amanda walked in Emma's direction and nodded. "I met Melissa on the other side of the first floor, she's currently with Han Yufei." "Then what about Jean?" A new quiver filled with arrows appeared on Amanda's hand as she shook her head. "I saw Troy and Arnold together, but Jean wasn't with them, so I don't know." Frowning, Kevin thought for a moment before saying, "Considering how the assassins targeting me knew how I fought, there's a chance he's still fighting against them." Remembering how difficult his fight with the black-clad individuals was, Kevin looked towards Emma and Amanda and said, "Let's go help him." "Yes." Nodding her head, Emma looked in Amanda's direction and said, "You coming?" "Yes." Nodding her head, Amanda followed Kevin and Emma towards Jin's room, which was only a few blocks away from where they were. Along the way, as they traveled through the first floor, Kevin alongside Emma swept through all of the black-clad individuals they met on their way. From behind them, Amanda continuously shot arrows to support them whenever the chance called for it. With her help, Emma and Kevin didn't need to worry about watching out for sneak attacks, making their lives much easier. After a couple of minutes, Kevin and the rest managed to arrive in front of a door with the number 575 engraved on the side. "Is this the place?" Nodding her head and looking at the number of the room, Emma confirmed. "Yes, that's his room number." Click! Opening the door, Kevin entered the room and looked for Jean. However, as soon as he entered the room, all he smelt was the heavy scent of iron. Frowning, Kevin walked inside of the room and entered the living room. And there he saw it. In the middle of the room was Jin's lifeless body laying down on the floor next to 4 black-hooded individuals whose limbs were all torn into a million pieces. Opening his eyes wide in disbelief, Kevin stopped dead in his track. "Hey, why did you st?" Appearing behind Kevin, Emma entered the living room, and just when she was about to speak, she stopped halfway through her sentence and gasped in shock. Following Emma, Amanda entered the room, and similarly to Emma, she gasped in shock. "Jean!" Snapping out of his stupor, running towards Jean, Kevin placed his finger on his neck and checked his pulse. "There's no way Jin's dead. There's just no way." Looking at Kevin hastily checking Jin's pulse, Emma couldn't help but repeat her words as she stood rooted on her spot in disbelief. After a couple of seconds, Kevin looked towards Emma and Amanda. He tried to say something, but no words came out of his mouth. It felt as if a massive lump was stuck in his throat, preventing any sound from coming out of his mouth. His mouth opened and closed multiple times, like a fish gasping for air. In the end, after a couple of seconds of trying, no word came out from his mouth. However, despite Kevin's inability to speak, everyone in the room understood what he was trying to convey. Jean was dead.